I thought I was dreaming when I felt my face hit the cold kitchen tiles, blood trickling from my split lip as I watched through blurred vision. My own daughter Sarah grabbed my gray hair with both hands, dragging me across the hardwood floor toward the front door while our neighbors stood on the sidewalk, their cell phones recording every humiliating second. She was screaming something about $6 million, while her husband Jake stood over me with clenched fists, his face twisted with rage. The sound of sirens was growing louder in the distance. This morning had started like any other Tuesday in my quiet Columbus neighborhood, but by noon, everything I believed about my family had shattered into pieces I might never put back together. 6 months earlier, my life was completely different. I was Debbie Patterson, 65 years old, recently retired from 37 years of teaching elementary school. My husband Frank had passed away 3 years before from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone in our modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street. The mortgage was paid off, and I lived comfortably on my teacher's pension and Frank's life insurance money. My world revolved around my daughter Sarah. At 32, she was everything I had hoped she would become: smart, beautiful, ambitious. She worked as a dental hygienist downtown and had married Jake Morrison 2 years earlier. Jake was 35, worked construction when he could find steady work, and had this charming smile that made everyone like him instantly. At least that's what I thought back then. Sarah and I talked every single day. She would call me on her lunch break and we would chat about everything: her work, her dreams, her marriage. She had always wanted to open her own dental practice, and I loved hearing her plan out every detail. The way her voice lit up when she talked about having her own office, helping patients, being her own boss, it filled my heart with such pride. But money was always tight for them. They lived in an expensive downtown loft that ate up most of their income. Jake was frequently between construction jobs, especially during the winter months, and I noticed he had started drinking more on weekends. Sarah would sometimes call me crying about their financial stress, about how hard it was to save anything toward her dental practice dream. I had been quietly working with my financial advisor, Robert Chen, investing Frank's life insurance money conservatively. Frank had always been careful with money, and I wanted to honor that. Robert had suggested some technology stocks that seemed stable, and I had agreed to put a portion of the money there, though I didn't really understand much about investing. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March when Robert called, his voice almost shaking with excitement. "Debbie, you need to sit down," he said. "Remember those technology stocks we discussed? There's been a major buyout. Your portfolio is now worth $6.2 million. I nearly dropped the phone. $6.2 million. I had never imagined having that kind of money. Frank and I had lived simply, saved carefully, but this was beyond anything we had ever dreamed of. My first thought was Sarah, my beautiful daughter who worked so hard, who dreamed so big, who deserved every opportunity in the world. I could give her the money for her dental practice. I could help her and Jake buy a house, start a family, live the life they wanted. The thought of surprising her with the news made me giddy with anticipation. But something strange had been happening lately. Sarah had been more distant, canceling our weekly lunch dates. She claimed work was keeping her busy, but when I stopped by the dental office, her colleagues said she had been taking long lunches and personal time. Jake had become more talkative during their visits, asking questions about my finances, my will, my plans for retirement. During their last visit, I had noticed a dark bruise on Sarah's wrist. When I asked about it, she quickly pulled down her sleeve and said she had bumped into a door. Jake was right there watching our conversation with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. The day before Robert called with the incredible news, I had been walking back to my car after grocery shopping when I heard Jake's voice from around the corner. He was on his phone, and something in his tone made me stop and listen. "The old lady's sitting on millions and doesn't even know what to do with it," he was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Sarah's got her wrapped around her finger. We just need to be patient and smart about this." My blood had run cold. The old lady. He was talking about me, and Sarah apparently had me wrapped around her finger. I stood there, frozen grocery bags cutting into my hands as the reality of what I had just heard sank in. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Jake's words, trying to make sense of them. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe he was talking about someone else. But deep down, I knew he wasn't. The next morning, when Robert called with the news about my windfall, I didn't feel the pure joy I should have felt. Instead, I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. If Jake somehow knew about my financial situation before I did, what else did he know? And more importantly, what was he planning to do about it? I decided not to tell Sarah about the money right away. Something told me I needed to be more careful to watch and listen more closely. The mother in me wanted to believe I was being paranoid, but the teacher in me, the woman who had spent nearly 4 decades reading people and situations, knew something wasn't right. That afternoon, Sarah called as usual, but the conversation felt different. She asked more questions about my health, my memory, whether I was taking my medications properly. She suggested I might want to think about moving somewhere with more security, maybe a senior living community where I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a house. Jake's voice echoed in my mind. "We just need to be patient and smart about this." For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own daughter. 4 months before that terrible Tuesday, I started paying attention to things I had been blind to before. It's amazing what you notice when you're actually looking. Sarah and Jake's visits became more frequent, but they felt calculated rather than loving. Jake would walk through my house like he was appraising it, commenting on the valuable hardwood floors and the prime location so close to downtown. The phone calls increased too. Strange people started reaching out about investment opportunities and estate planning services. When I asked how they got my number, they mentioned that a family member had expressed concern about my financial future. I began to suspect Sarah or Jake had given out my information. Jake started making suggestions about my house during every visit. He would point out small maintenance issues, a loose bathroom tile, a squeaky door hinge, a water stain on the ceiling from last winter's ice dam. "Debbie, you really should think about selling this place," he said one afternoon while examining my kitchen faucet. "The neighborhood's going downhill. It's not safe for an elderly woman living alone. What if something happens and nobody's around to help?" Sarah nodded along, her face painted with artificial concern. "Mom, Jake's right. We worry about you constantly. These old houses require so much upkeep." They brought up senior living communities more frequently, leaving brochures on my coffee table. Sunny Gardens Assisted Living, Golden Years Manor, Paradise Falls Senior Community. All expensive, all requiring residents to liquidate their assets to pay the enormous monthly fees. The real estate pressure intensified when they brought an agent to my house without asking permission. I came home from grocery shopping one Tuesday to find a woman in a business suit measuring my living room while Jake took notes. "Mom, this is Linda Walsh from Premier Properties," Sarah said, as if ambushing me with a realtor was perfectly normal. "We thought it would be helpful to get a market assessment just so you know your options." Linda Walsh looked at me with practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Patterson, your daughter is wise to be thinking ahead. Houses like this are selling quickly in today's market. You could get top dollar and have the freedom to enjoy your golden years without worrying about maintenance and upkeep." I politely asked them all to leave. That evening, Sarah called to apologize for not warning me, but she insisted they were only trying to help. The conversation lasted over an hour with Sarah crying about how much she loved me and how terrified she was that something would happen to me. But it was the financial manipulation that really opened my eyes. Sarah started asking me to co-sign for loans. First, it was for dental equipment she claimed she needed for a promotion at work. Then it was for a new car because Jake's truck was breaking down and he needed reliable transportation for job sites. Jake began mentioning my will during casual conversation, suggesting I should update it and recommending a specific lawyer named David Kruger. He specializes in estate planning for seniors, Jake explained. He can make sure everything is set up properly so Sarah won't have any problems when the time comes. They pushed for power of attorney documents, claiming it was just good planning, in case I ever needed help managing my affairs. Sarah cried about how she couldn't bear the thought of me being taken advantage of by strangers if I ever became incapacitated. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late May. I was supposed to have dinner at Sarah and Jake's apartment, but I arrived 20 minutes early and found a parking spot right in front of their building. I was about to call Sarah to let her know I was there when I heard shouting from their second-floor window. "She's not going to live forever anyway." Sarah's voice carried clearly down to the street. "Why should we keep waiting and struggling when she's sitting on all that money doing nothing with it?" Jake's response was even more chilling. "We need to speed this up. I found out about a gambling debt situation that's getting complicated. If we don't move fast, we're going to lose our chance." I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, listening to my daughter and son-in-law discuss my death like it was a business opportunity. They talked about timelines and strategies about getting me declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of my assets. That night, I drove home in a daze. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at the same cup of cold coffee, trying to process what I had heard. My only child, the little girl I had raised alone after her father walked out, the young woman I had put through college by working extra jobs, was planning to steal my money and possibly worse. The next day, I started making some calls of my own. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Thompson to look into Jake's background. What he found terrified me. Jake owed serious money to dangerous people, illegal sports betting debts that had spiraled out of control. He had been borrowing from loan sharks to pay other loan sharks, and the pressure was mounting. Marcus also discovered that Jake had been researching elder abuse laws, specifically looking into how guardianship proceedings worked and what it took to have someone declared mentally incompetent. Sarah had been Googling similar topics from her work computer. But the most devastating discovery came when Marcus showed me printed copies of emails between Sarah and Jake. They had been planning this for months, mapping out a strategy to convince everyone that I was losing my mental faculties. They had researched which doctors were most likely to support a diagnosis of early dementia, which lawyers specialized in quick guardianship proceedings, and which judges had granted similar petitions in the past. One email from Sarah to Jake made my blood run cold. "We have to be careful not to move too fast. If anyone gets suspicious, we could lose everything. The plan only works if everyone believes Mom is declining naturally and we're just loving children trying to help." Another email from Jake was even worse. "Once we get guardianship, we can sell the house immediately and liquidate the investments. We'll pay off my debts first, then figure out what to do with the rest. If she ends up in a state facility instead of private care, that's more money for us." I realized that night that I wasn't just dealing with financial exploitation. My daughter and son-in-law were willing to destroy my life, my independence, and my reputation to solve their money problems. And if their plan worked, I would spend my remaining years in some horrible state-run nursing home while they enjoyed the money Frank and I had worked our entire lives to save. For the first time since Frank died, I felt truly alone. But I also felt something else, a fierce determination to fight back. I might have been a 65-year-old retired teacher, but I wasn't going to be anyone's victim. The war for my life was about to begin. 2 months before the attack, Sarah and Jake launched their campaign in earnest. It started with daily visits ostensibly out of concern for my well-being. They would arrive unannounced, letting themselves in with the spare key I had foolishly given them years earlier. "Mom, you left the stove on again," Sarah would say, even though I hadn't used the stove that day. "I can smell gas in here. You could have burned the house down." Jake would nod gravely and suggest we install safety monitors throughout the house. "It's not your fault, Debbie. These things happen as we get older. The important thing is keeping you safe." They began rearranging my furniture, claiming I had asked them to help redecorate. I would come home from errands to find my reading chair moved to a different corner, family photos relocated to unfamiliar shelves, and kitchen items stored in cabinets where I never kept them. When I protested, Sarah would look at me with exaggerated concern. "Mom, you asked us to do this yesterday. Don't you remember our conversation about wanting to freshen up the living room?" Jake started recording our conversations on his phone, though he tried to hide it. He would ask me questions designed to confuse me, mixing up dates, names of my former students' details about Frank's death. When I corrected him, he would insist I was mistaken and replay his recording to prove what I had supposedly said. They brought witnesses to these sessions: Sarah's friend Jennifer, Jake's co-worker Danny, neighbors they had befriended. These people would nod sympathetically as Sarah explained her concerns about my memory and judgment. "She's been forgetting our conversations," Sarah would tell them while I sat right there. "Yesterday she called me 3 times asking the same question about her prescription medication. I'm really worried about her living alone." The medical manipulation was the most insidious part of their plan. Sarah scheduled a doctor's appointment for me, claiming she was concerned about my cognitive function. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had been my physician for 8 years and knew me well, but Sarah and Jake painted a picture of decline that made even her take notice. "Mrs. Patterson has been having some concerning episodes," Jake told Dr. Martinez during the appointment I thought was for my annual physical. "She's been leaving appliances on, forgetting recent conversations, getting confused about dates and times." Sarah added her own observations, complete with crocodile tears. "I found her standing in her kitchen last week, completely lost. She couldn't remember what she was looking for or how long she'd been standing there. It broke my heart." Dr. Martinez asked me questions about my daily routine, my sleep patterns, my appetite. I answered honestly, but Jake would interrupt to correct my responses or provide additional context that painted me as confused and unreliable. The doctor recommended cognitive testing and a psychiatric evaluation. While I was scheduling these appointments, Sarah and Jake spoke privately with the nurse, providing a written list of concerning behaviors they claimed to have witnessed. The financial pressure intensified during this period. Mysterious problems started plaguing my house. Pipes leaked in the basement, electrical outlets stopped working, the garage door opener malfunctioned. Jake was always ready with solutions, but his repair estimates were astronomical. "This old electrical system is dangerous, Debbie," he said after examining the outlet in my bedroom that had mysteriously stopped working. "You need a complete rewiring job. I'm talking $15,000 minimum, and that's just the electrical work. The plumbing is probably just as bad." They produced brochures for expensive memory care facilities, spreading them across my kitchen table like travel pamphlets. Willowbrook Manor, where a basic room cost $8,000 per month. Serenity Heights, which required a $100,000 entrance fee plus monthly charges. "Look at these beautiful facilities, Mom," Sarah said, pointing to glossy photos of smiling elderly residents playing bingo and tending garden plots. "Wouldn't it be nice to have people taking care of you, friends to spend time with, activities to keep you busy? No more worrying about maintenance or safety." Jake added financial pressure by suggesting my neighborhood was becoming dangerous. He brought newspaper clippings about break-ins and car thefts from areas nowhere near my street, claiming they had happened nearby. "Crime is spreading everywhere," he said ominously. "Elderly people are easy targets. You really should consider moving somewhere with security guards and controlled access." The isolation tactics were perhaps the cruelest part of their scheme. Sarah began calling my longtime friends, expressing concern about my mental state. She told them I had been saying strange things, forgetting conversations, becoming paranoid, and difficult to be around. My friend Helen stopped calling after Sarah told her I had accused Helen of stealing from me during her last visit. My neighbor Carol became distant after Sarah explained that I had been spreading rumors about Carol's family. One by one, my support system was being dismantled by my own daughter's lies. They intercepted my mail claiming the postal service was unreliable, and they wanted to make sure I didn't miss important correspondence. Jake changed the locks on my house for security purposes, giving me a new key while keeping the spares for themselves. Most disturbing of all, my phone began malfunctioning. Calls would drop unexpectedly, text messages would arrive hours late or not at all, and the battery drained much faster than normal. I later discovered Jake had installed monitoring software that allowed them to track my calls, read my messages, and even listened to my conversations through the microphone. But I wasn't sitting idle during this campaign of psychological warfare. Working with my new lawyer, Patricia Williams, I began documenting everything. I kept a detailed journal of their visits, their claims, their manipulation tactics. Patricia recommended a private investigator who specialized in elder abuse cases, and together we started building a counter strategy. I underwent an independent psychological evaluation with Dr. Stephen Rodriguez, a geriatric psychiatrist Patricia recommended. The results were clear. I showed no signs of cognitive decline, dementia, or any other mental health condition that would impair my judgment or decision-making ability. I secretly transferred the majority of my assets into a protected trust that Sarah and Jake couldn't access even if they obtained guardianship over me. The process was complicated, but Patricia guided me through every step, ensuring my money would be safe regardless of what happened. Most importantly, I installed a sophisticated security system in my house without telling them. Hidden cameras recorded their visits, their conversations, their searches through my personal belongings. Audio recording devices captured every manipulation attempt, every lie they told about my behavior, every detail of their scheme. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening in early August. I was pretending to nap in my bedroom when Jake and Sarah let themselves into my house for one of their wellness checks. They thought I was asleep, so they spoke freely as they went through my files and belongings. "The hearing is scheduled for next Friday," Jake said, rifling through my desk drawers. "Kruger says we have enough documentation to get temporary guardianship approved. Once that happens, we can move fast on everything else." Sarah's response chilled me to the bone. "What about Mom? Where will she go once we sell the house?" Kruger found a state facility that costs about $1,200 a month. Basic room, shared bathroom, cafeteria meals. It's not pretty, but it's cheap. The more we save on her care, the more we keep for ourselves. They had already filed guardianship papers. They had already found the cheapest possible warehouse for elderly people to dump me in. They were discussing my future like I was a burden to be disposed of as efficiently as possible. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated a retired elementary school teacher who had spent nearly 40 years dealing with bullies, liars, and troublemakers. They thought they were smart, but I had been collecting evidence of their crimes for months. Their entire scheme was about to collapse around them, and they had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks before the attack, I had all the evidence I needed to destroy them completely. The hardest part wasn't gathering proof of their crimes. It was continuing to act like the confused, helpless old woman they believed me to be. Every day was an acting performance that required me to suppress my rage and play the role of their victim. Patricia Williams had prepared a comprehensive counterpetition that would expose Sarah and Jake's elder abuse scheme to the family court. We had recordings, security camera footage, financial records, medical evaluations, witness statements, and documented proof of their systematic campaign to steal my money and destroy my independence. But Patricia wanted to catch them in the act of actually committing the crimes they had been planning. "We have evidence of conspiracy and attempted fraud," she explained during one of our secret meetings at her office. "But if we can record them actually trying to force you to sign documents or threatening you physically, we'll have them on multiple felony charges." I agreed to wear a wire during what would be our final confrontation. Patricia coordinated with Detective James Murphy from the Columbus Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, who had been building his own case against elder abuse rings operating in our area. The independent psychological evaluation Dr. Rodriguez had conducted showed I was in perfect mental health. His report systematically debunked every claim Sarah and Jake had made about my cognitive decline. More importantly, he had identified their behavior as a textbook elder abuse campaign designed to isolate and control an elderly victim. I had secretly moved 90% of my assets into an irrevocable trust managed by a firm Patricia recommended. Even if Sarah and Jake somehow obtained guardianship, they would find less than $200,000 in accessible accounts. And even that money was protected by additional legal safeguards. But Jake had been getting increasingly desperate. His gambling debts were coming due, and the dangerous people he owed money to were making serious threats. Marcus Thompson, my private investigator, showed me photos of Jake's truck with slashed tires and a threatening message spray-painted on the windshield. The pressure was making Jake reckless. He had already forged my signature on several documents, stealing nearly $300,000 from my checking account over the course of 2 months. He thought he was being clever, taking amounts that seemed reasonable for an elderly woman's expenses, but Patricia's forensic accountant had tracked every fraudulent transaction. Sarah's emotional manipulation reached new heights during this period. She would arrive at my house crying, begging me to trust family over the lawyers and doctors she claimed were trying to take advantage of me. "Mom, you're all I have left," she would sob, gripping my hands with desperate intensity. "Dad walked out on us when I was little, remember? It was always just you and me against the world. How can you believe strangers over your own daughter?" She would bring up memories from her childhood, reminding me of times I had sacrificed for her, protected her, put her needs above my own. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to make me feel guilty for not trusting her. Jake took a different approach, alternating between charm and subtle intimidation. He would compliment my appearance, bring me flowers, fix small things around the house without being asked. But there was always an undercurrent of threat in his behavior. "You know Debbie Sarah really is your best advocate," he would say, while replacing a burned-out light bulb in my hallway. "She's the only one who really cares about what happens to you. These lawyers and financial people, they just want to get their hands on your money. Family is all you can trust in this world." The night before our planned confrontation, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the little girl I had raised, the daughter I had loved unconditionally, the woman who was now planning to destroy my life for money. Where had I gone wrong? How had I failed her so completely that she could treat me this way? But I also thought about all the elderly people who weren't as fortunate as me. People who didn't have the resources to fight back, who didn't have allies like Patricia and Detective Murphy, who ended up losing everything to family members who saw them as nothing more than walking bank accounts. My case had the potential to help other victims. Patricia planned to use our evidence to push for stronger elder abuse laws. Detective Murphy was working on a larger investigation into similar schemes throughout Ohio. If I could help prevent other families from going through this nightmare, then maybe something good could come from my pain. Sarah called that morning to schedule what she called an emergency family meeting at my house. She claimed there was a crisis that required immediate financial decisions and insisted I needed to sign some documents right away. I agreed to the meeting knowing it would be our final confrontation. Patricia had briefed the police who would be standing by in unmarked cars around my neighborhood. My security cameras were recording everything. The wire I was wearing would capture every word they said. Most importantly, my neighbors had been quietly alerted to call 911 if they witnessed any disturbance at my house. Margaret Collins next door, Tommy Rodriguez across the street, and Helen Murphy at the corner had all been briefed about the situation and were watching for signs of trouble. I spent the morning reviewing Patricia's instructions. Stay calm. Let them talk. Don't reveal that I knew about their scheme until they had committed themselves to their crimes. Get them to admit their plans on the recording. Most importantly, protect myself physically if the situation became dangerous. As I waited for Sarah and Jake to arrive for what they thought would be their payday, I felt a strange sense of peace. For months, I had been living in fear, confused by their lies, devastated by their betrayal. But now I knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. They thought they were coming to collect $6 million from a helpless old woman. Instead, they were walking into a trap that would destroy their lives and send them to prison for a very long time. The student was about to become the teacher, and the lesson I was about to give them would be one they never forgot. The morning of the confrontation felt like any other Tuesday in August, with bright sunshine and a gentle breeze rustling through the maple trees lining my street. I had coffee and toast at my kitchen table, watered the geraniums on my front porch, and waved to Margaret Collins as she walked her little terrier past my house. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, ordinary, which made what was about to happen even more surreal. Sarah called at exactly 9 o'clock, her voice tight with urgency. "Mom, we need to meet at your house right away. There's been a development with Jake's work situation, and we need to make some immediate financial decisions. Can we be there by 10? I told her that would be fine, though my heart was already racing. Patricia Williams had prepared me for this moment, but knowing something is coming and actually facing it are two completely different things. I checked the battery on my recording device, made sure the security cameras were functioning properly, and sent a prearranged text message to Detective Murphy, letting him know the confrontation was beginning. Jake arrived first, parking his beat-up truck in my driveway with more force than necessary. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes I had seen him in 3 days earlier. The pressure from his creditors was clearly taking its toll. Sarah pulled up behind him in her sedan, and they walked to my front door together. Through the window, I could see them having an intense, whispered conversation before Jake rang the doorbell. When I opened the door, Sarah immediately hugged me, but it felt mechanical, performative. "Mom, thank you for seeing us on such short notice," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We really need to talk about some important things." They settled into my living room, Jake on the sofa and Sarah in the chair closest to me. Jake pulled out a folder thick with official-looking documents, spreading them across my coffee table like a salesman preparing his pitch. "Debbie, we've been doing a lot of research about your financial situation." Jake began, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before, cold, businesslike, demanding. "We know about the $6.2 million in your investment accounts." My blood turned to ice, but I forced myself to look confused. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jake. $6 million I'm living on my teacher's pension." Sarah leaned forward, her face a mask of fake sympathy mixed with barely contained impatience. Mom, we know. Robert Chen told us everything when we explained our concerns about your mental state. The money is there, and you need help managing it properly. That was the first lie I caught them in on the recording. Robert Chen had never spoken to them. I had specifically instructed him not to discuss my finances with anyone. They had somehow learned about my windfall through other means, probably through their illegal monitoring of my communications. Jake's facade of politeness began to slip. Look, Debbie, we're not here to play games. You're sitting on a fortune while Sarah and I are drowning in debt. That money should be helping your family, not just sitting in some bank account. I told you I don't have any millions of dollars. I insisted, sticking to my role as the confused elderly woman they thought I was. That's when Jake exploded. He slammed his hand on the coffee table, making me jump and causing one of the documents to flutter to the floor. Don't lie to us. We know everything. The investments, the trust accounts, the real estate assessments. We've done our homework. Sarah tried to play good cop to Jake's bad cop routine. Mom, Jake's just stressed because we're in serious financial trouble. He owes some very dangerous people a lot of money, and they're threatening to hurt him if he doesn't pay up soon. The truth was finally coming out. Jake owed money to criminals, and they saw my inheritance as their salvation. But Jake wasn't interested in Sarah's gentle approach anymore. I don't have time for this manipulation, he snarled, standing up and towering over me in my chair. I need $300,000 by Friday or I'm a dead man. You're going to sign these papers transferring power of attorney to Sarah, and then we're going to liquidate whatever accounts we need to save my life. I can't sign papers I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling with genuine fear now. Jake's desperation was making him unpredictable and dangerous. You'll sign them because you don't have a choice, Jake said, grabbing the documents from the coffee table and shoving them toward me. We've already filed guardianship papers claiming you're mentally incompetent. We have medical records, witness statements, documentation of your declining mental state. By next week, Sarah will have legal control over every penny you own anyway. Sarah added her voice to the pressure campaign. Mom, we're trying to do this the easy way with your cooperation. But if you force us to go through the courts, everyone is going to know about your problems. Your friends, your neighbors, your former colleagues. They'll all hear about how your own daughter had to take control because you couldn't handle your own affairs anymore. The threat was clear. Sign the papers voluntarily, or they would destroy my reputation and take my money through the legal system they had already corrupted with their lies. I stood up slowly, using my cane for support, and walked toward my kitchen. Let me get my reading glasses so I can look at these papers properly. But I wasn't going for reading glasses. I was moving toward my phone to call Patricia Williams as we had planned. That's when Jake realized I wasn't going to cooperate willingly. No phone calls, he shouted, lunging after me and grabbing my arm. You're not calling anyone until we get this settled. Let go of me, I demanded, trying to pull away from his grip. That's when everything went wrong. Jake's desperation and my resistance created a perfect storm of violence that erupted faster than either of us expected. You selfish old woman, Jake screamed, his face contorted with rage. My life is on the line, and you're worried about some money you'll never live long enough to spend anyway. He shoved me backward, and I stumbled against the kitchen counter. When I tried to reach for the phone again, he grabbed my wrist and twisted it painfully. Jake, don't hurt her, Sarah called from the living room, but there was no real alarm in her voice, no attempt to physically intervene. She's going to sign those papers right now, or I'm going to make her sign them, Jake threatened. I won't sign anything, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I know what you've been doing. I know about your debts, your lies, your plan to steal my money. That's when Jake lost complete control. His fist came out of nowhere, connecting with my left cheek with a force that sent me crashing to the kitchen floor. Pain exploded through my face, and I felt blood trickling from my split lip. Jake, Sarah screamed, but she was screaming at me, not at him. Look what you made him do. Why couldn't you just cooperate? Why did you have to be so stubborn? I was lying on my kitchen floor tasting blood, looking up at two people I no longer recognized. The daughter I had raised, the son-in-law I had welcomed into our family were standing over me like predators who had finally cornered their prey. Get up, Jake commanded, breathing heavily from his outburst. Get up and sign those papers or the next one will be worse. When I didn't move fast enough for his liking, Sarah made her choice. She grabbed my gray hair with both hands and began dragging me across the kitchen floor toward the living room. If you won't walk, then we'll drag you, she said through gritted teeth. $6 million, Mom? $6 million that should be helping your family instead of sitting in some bank account making rich people richer. The pain of being dragged by my hair was excruciating, but the emotional pain was worse. My own daughter was literally dragging me across the floor of the house where she had grown up, the house where I had bandaged her scraped knees and read her bedtime stories and helped her with homework at the kitchen table where I now lay bleeding. Through the window, I could see neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. Margaret Collins from next door had her phone out, and I prayed she was calling 911 as we had planned. Tommy Rodriguez from across the street was running toward my house. Sarah continued screaming about the $6 million, making sure everyone could hear her justification for what they were doing. She's confused. She doesn't understand what's happening. We're trying to help her. But Jake was past the point of caring about public appearances. I don't care who sees this, he said, standing over me with his fists clenched. I'm not going to die because some old woman is too selfish to help her own family. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen, shoving it into my hand, along with the crumpled power of attorney documents. Sign it now, or I'll break every bone in your hand until you do. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the wail of police sirens getting closer and closer to my house. Sarah and Jake heard them too. Jake's face went white as he realized what was happening. Someone called the cops, Sarah said, stating the obvious. So, what? Jake replied, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. We'll tell them you were having an episode, that we were trying to help you, that you fell and hurt yourself. But it was too late for lies and cover stories. Through my front window, I could see police cars pulling up to my house, officers getting out, neighbors pointing toward my front door. The trap had been sprung, and Sarah and Jake were about to learn that sometimes the victim fights back. The sound of police sirens had never been more beautiful. As the wailing grew louder and closer, I watched Jake's face transform from rage to panic to desperate calculation. Sarah was still gripping my hair, but her hold loosened as the reality of their situation began to sink in. 3 patrol cars converged on my house within minutes of each other. Detective Murphy had coordinated the response perfectly. Officers were positioned to block any escape routes while ensuring they could witness whatever was happening inside my house. Through my living room window, I could see Officer Jennifer Martinez approaching my front door, while her partner, Officer David Thompson, moved around to cover the backyard. Detective Murphy emerged from an unmarked sedan, speaking quickly into his radio. "Let go of her right now," came a commanding voice from my front porch as the police announced their presence. Jake made one final desperate attempt to control the situation. He knelt down beside me, gripping my shoulders painfully, and hissed in my ear, "Tell them you fell. Tell them we were helping you. If you don't, I swear I'll make sure you regret it." But Sarah had a different reaction. As the police knocked on the front door, she suddenly released my hair and stepped back, her face a mask of fake concern and innocence. "Thank God you're here," she called out loudly enough for the officers to hear. "My mother fell and hurt herself. We've been trying to help her, but she's been confused and combative." Jake picked up on her cue immediately. "She's been having episodes like this more and more often. We're worried about her mental state." When Officer Martinez entered my house, she found me lying on my kitchen floor with blood on my face and torn clothing, while Sarah and Jake stood over me wearing expressions of manufactured worry. But what they didn't know was that my neighbors had been recording everything on their phones. Margaret Collins had captured video of Sarah dragging me by my hair, while Jake stood over me with raised fists. Tommy Rodriguez had recorded audio of their screaming about $6 million and their threats to hurt me if I didn't cooperate. Officer Martinez knelt beside me, her voice gentle but professional. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here?" Before I could answer, Jake jumped in with his prepared story. "She was trying to get to her medication when she fell. We found her like this and were helping her when she became agitated and started swinging at us." "That's not true," I said clearly, my voice stronger than I had expected. "They attacked me because I wouldn't sign papers giving them control of my money." Sarah immediately began crying. Real tears this time, but tears of fear rather than grief. "Mom, you're confused again. We were trying to help you understand some important financial documents when you became upset." Officer Thompson had entered through the back door and was examining the scattered papers on my coffee table. "Ma'am," he said to me, "are these documents you wanted to sign?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "Those are power of attorney papers they were trying to force me to sign so they could steal my inheritance." Detective Murphy arrived just as Jake was launching into another explanation about my alleged mental confusion. But the detective had been briefed about our case and knew exactly what to look for. "Mr. Morris and Ms. Patterson," Detective Murphy said formally, "I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you." As they fumbled for their IDs, I slowly got to my feet with Officer Martinez's help. My face was swollen, my lip was still bleeding, and my scalp ached from being dragged by my hair, but I was alive and the cavalry had arrived. "Detective," I said clearly, "I have recordings of everything that happened here today. I also have evidence that these two have been planning to steal my money for months." Jake's face went pale. "Recordings? What recordings?" That's when I revealed the wire I had been wearing, carefully removing it from under my blouse and handing it to Detective Murphy. "I've been working with my attorney and your department for weeks to gather evidence of their elder abuse scheme." Sarah's fake tears turned into real panic. "Mom, what are you talking about? We love you. We were trying to help you." Detective Murphy spoke into his radio, calling for additional units and a crime scene technician. Then he turned to Jake and Sarah with the cold professionalism of a veteran investigator. "Based on the evidence we've observed, and the witness statements from neighbors, I'm placing both of you under arrest for elder abuse assault, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The reading of their Miranda rights was music to my ears. Jake tried to argue, claiming they had done nothing wrong and that I was mentally incompetent to make accusations against them. Sarah alternated between sobbing apologies and angry denials. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Jake made one last desperate threat. "You have no idea what you've done, old woman. The people I owe money to don't care if I'm in jail. They'll come after you next." Detective Murphy heard this threat clearly and added intimidation of a witness to the growing list of charges. The crime scene technician arrived to photograph my injuries and document the evidence scattered around my house. The power of attorney documents Jake had tried to force me to sign were collected as evidence, along with the pen he had shoved into my hand. But the most damning evidence was still to come. Detective Murphy called Patricia Williams, who arrived within 20 minutes, carrying boxes of documentation we had been collecting for weeks. The recordings from my security cameras showed Jake and Sarah entering my house, searching through my belongings during previous visits, and having detailed conversations about their scheme to steal my money. The audio recordings from the wire I had been wearing captured every word of their threats, every admission of their plan, every detail of their systematic elder abuse campaign. Patricia also brought the forensic accounting reports showing how Jake had already stolen nearly $300,000 from my accounts through forged signatures and unauthorized transactions. Bank surveillance footage showed him making these transactions while I was supposedly too confused to manage my own affairs. As Sarah and Jake were led to separate patrol cars, neighbors emerged from their houses to offer support and provide additional witness statements. Margaret Collins tearfully apologized for not intervening sooner, though her phone call to 911 had quite literally saved my life. The paramedics arrived to treat my injuries and document them for the assault charges. The split lip required 3 stitches, and my face would be bruised for weeks, but the damage could have been much worse if the police hadn't arrived when they did. As I sat in my living room giving my statement to Detective Murphy, I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that the nightmare was finally over, that justice was being served, that other elderly victims might be protected because of our case. But heartbreak too, because the daughter I had raised and loved was being arrested for trying to destroy my life. The little girl I had read bedtime stories to, the teenager I had supported through her difficult years, the young woman I had been so proud of. That person had either never existed or had been corrupted beyond recognition by greed and desperation. Detective Murphy assured me that the evidence against them was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial documents, the witness statements, and the physical evidence of their attack would virtually guarantee convictions on multiple felony charges. But as I watched the patrol cars drive away, carrying Sarah and Jake to jail, I realized that winning this battle was only the beginning. The real work, healing from their betrayal and rebuilding my life, was still ahead of me. For now, though, justice had arrived at my front door, and the people who had tried to steal my future were finally facing the consequences of their crimes. 6 months after that terrible Tuesday, I was sitting in courtroom 4B of the Franklin County Courthouse, watching Judge Patricia Hamilton sentence my daughter to 15 years in prison. Sarah stood at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. Her hands shackled, her face streaked with tears that came too late to matter. Jake had accepted a plea bargain 3 months earlier, admitting guilt to elder abuse, assault, theft, and conspiracy charges in exchange for a 12-year sentence. He was already serving his time at the Southeastern Correctional Institution, where his gambling debts had followed him even behind bars. But Sarah had refused to plea bargain. Her public defender had tried to convince her to accept responsibility and negotiate for a lighter sentence, but Sarah maintained she was innocent, claiming she had been manipulated by Jake and was only trying to help her confused mother. The jury hadn't believed her. After hearing the recordings, watching the security camera footage, and listening to testimony from neighbors, medical experts, and financial investigators, they had found her guilty on all counts after deliberating for less than 3 hours. Judge Hamilton's voice was stern as she addressed Sarah before imposing sentence. "Ms. Patterson, you systematically abused and exploited your own mother, the woman who raised you and loved you unconditionally. You attempted to steal her life savings, destroy her independence, and warehouse her in the cheapest possible care facility so you could enjoy the money she had worked her entire life to save. This court finds your behavior particularly egregious because of the trust relationship you violated." Sarah tried to interrupt to offer one final manipulation, but Judge Hamilton silenced her with a raised hand. "Your mother's courage in fighting back has helped expose an elder abuse network that was targeting vulnerable seniors throughout Ohio. Because of her bravery and the evidence she helped gather, we have been able to protect other elderly victims and prosecute other criminals. You, however, showed no remorse and no recognition of the harm you caused. The sentence of this court is 15 years in the Ohio Reformatory for Women, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. I felt no satisfaction watching my daughter led away in chains. There was justice, yes, but justice for a terrible crime that should never have happened in the first place. The financial recovery had taken months of work with forensic accountants and federal investigators. Some of the money Jake had stolen was recovered through asset forfeiture. His truck tools and personal belongings were sold to partially compensate for the theft. Insurance covered another portion of my losses. But the most important recovery was my independence and dignity. The protected trust I had established kept the majority of my inheritance safe from their schemes. My house remained my own. My mental competence had been thoroughly documented and legally established. I decided to use this terrible experience to help others. With Patricia Williams's help, I established the Frank Patterson Elder Protection Foundation named after my late husband. The foundation provides legal assistance to elderly victims of family exploitation funds, research into elder abuse prevention, and advocates for stronger laws to protect seniors from financial predators. The foundation's work led to new legislation in Ohio requiring additional safeguards for elderly people making major financial decisions. Banks now have protocols for identifying potential elder abuse situations. Adult Protective Services received increased funding and training. My speaking engagements at conferences and community centers had an impact I never expected. Other seniors came forward to report similar abuse from their own family members. Adult children who had been contemplating financial exploitation of their elderly parents reconsidered after hearing my story. The healing process was gradual and sometimes painful. I attended therapy to work through the trauma of betrayal by the person I had loved most in the world. Dr. Sandra Foster helped me understand that the daughter who attacked me had chosen greed over love, that her actions reflected her character rather than any failure on my part as a mother. My relationships with neighbors deepened into genuine friendships. Margaret Collins became like a sister to me, and we had coffee together every morning on one of our front porches. Tommy Rodriguez and his wife Maria included me in their family gatherings, treating me like the grandmother their children had never known. An unexpected blessing came in the form of Harold Mitchell, a widower I met at an elder abuse survivors support group. Harold's son had tried to steal his farm through a similar guardianship scheme, and he understood the unique pain of family betrayal. Our friendship grew slowly into companionship, then into something deeper. Harold and I didn't need passion or romance at our age. We needed understanding companionship and someone to share the good days and support each other through the difficult ones. He moved into my guest bedroom 18 months after the trial, and we created a peaceful life together, built on mutual respect and shared experience. I adopted a rescue dog named Buddy, a golden retriever mix, who had been abused by his previous owners. Buddy and I understood each other. We had both survived betrayal and learned to trust again. He followed me everywhere, providing both companionship and security. The money continued to grow through careful investment, and I found joy in giving it away to causes that mattered. Scholarship funds for students studying social work and elder law, grants for organizations serving elderly victims of crime, support for research into elder abuse prevention and prosecution. 2 years after the trial, I received an invitation to testify before Congress about elder abuse prevention. Standing in that hearing room, telling my story to senators and representatives, knowing that my experience might help protect millions of other elderly Americans. It felt like the most important thing I had ever done. Sarah wrote to me regularly from prison letters filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. I read each one carefully, then filed them away without responding. Forgiveness might come someday, but it would have to be earned through genuine change and accountability, not just words on paper. Jake's letters were different: angry, blaming, threatening. He maintained that he was the real victim, that I had destroyed his life by refusing to help him with his gambling debts. These letters went directly to Detective Murphy, who used them as evidence of Jake's continued criminal thinking. The neighborhood had changed in positive ways too. My case had brought attention to the vulnerability of elderly residents, leading to the formation of a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on protecting seniors from exploitation. We held monthly meetings where older residents could share concerns and younger neighbors could offer assistance. My former teaching colleagues reached out after hearing about my case, and I reconnected with educators who had shaped my career and former students who had grown into successful adults. The isolation Sarah and Jake had tried to impose on me was replaced by a rich network of genuine relationships. On quiet evenings, sitting on my front porch with Harold and Buddy, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children play in their yards, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but genuine contentment with my life and my choices. The Foundation's work had helped change laws and protect vulnerable people. My testimony had influenced national policy discussions about elder abuse. The money Frank and I had saved was being used to make the world a little bit better, a little bit safer for people who couldn't protect themselves. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that family isn't determined by blood relationships. It's created by love, loyalty, and mutual support. Margaret Harold Tommy and Maria Dr. Foster, Patricia Williams, Detective Murphy. These people had become my real family, the people who cared about my well-being without expecting anything in return. The little girl I had raised and loved had made her choices. The woman she became was responsible for the consequences of those choices. But the mother who had given everything for her daughter's happiness had learned to give that same energy and care to people who actually deserved it. As I finish telling you this story, I want to ask you something important. Do you have elderly family members or neighbors who might be vulnerable to this kind of exploitation? Are there warning signs you should be watching for? Isolation, sudden financial changes, new, helpful people in their lives who seem more interested in their assets than their well-being. Elder abuse is more common than most people realize, and it's often committed by the very family members who are supposed to protect and care for elderly relatives. If my story helps even one person recognize these warning signs and protect a vulnerable senior, then something good will have come from my pain. Thank you for listening to my story, for caring about an issue that affects millions of elderly Americans, and for being part of a community that looks out for its most vulnerable members. Please like this video if it touched your heart. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice. Share it with friends and family who need to understand these warning signs, and comment below with your own experiences or questions about elder abuse prevention. I hope your own golden years are filled with genuine love, authentic relationships, and the peace that comes from knowing you're surrounded by people who truly care about you. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and never be afraid to fight for what's right, no matter how old you are or how impossible the odds might seem. Sometimes the victim becomes the victor, and justice really does prevail.